Welcome to Eyes on Books.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Eyes on Books. I'm so glad you're joining us this morning. I think you're really going to enjoy hearing about our book today. It's called The Foursome by a well-known author, Christina Baker Klein. You may have even read some of her works before. My name is Elaine Schnitter, and I'll be your host. My co-host this morning is Bill Hemberger. So we will tell you a little bit about the book, the story. We'll try not to give anything away.
Yeah.
And then we'll introduce the author. And I think you will really like meeting her. Okay, so Bill, tell us about this book.
Okay, so imagine a marriage where you share a bed with your sister, your husband, your brother-in-law, and then imagine having 21 kids in this situation, enduring the Civil War, and then having to build two separate homes just to survive each other, each family. This is what this book basically is about. It's an intriguing read.
It is a little difficult to imagine what you just described.
And I knew about these twins just from reading because they were in the Guinness World Book of Records. Mm-hmm. And when I first saw this book, I thought, okay, this is going to be like a tabloid story. And it wasn't.
No, it certainly wasn't.
She handled it extremely well.
Mm-hmm. So the story is about the original Siamese twins, and that's actually where the name came from.
Right.
These twins were born in Thailand. At the time it was called Siam, and they were perfectly happy. They were in a small village. They worked on a boat. They were young. They needed money. They sold duck eggs. And then they were discovered. And no one in the village thought a whole lot of it. I believe they called them double boys. But then when they were discovered, that was a whole new life for them. And they were brought to New York City. And from there, they were pretty much a showpiece and traveled all around the world with an agent. And they made a lot of money.
Yeah, that's where they made their money. And they invested their money in a farm, in real estate.
Yeah.
And families. 21 kids that's when I was reading this, as we all do, which makes it one of the things that's intriguing about it, is envisioning this. Mm-hmm. Siamese twins, 21 kids. How does that happen? So,
yes, we needed to use our imagination on this to envision it for sure. But what I found the whole book was so interesting because not only did it cover this unusual marriage and this unusual family, it also was during the period before the Civil War, during the Civil War, and post-Civil War. So in addition to the family, there was a lot of history there, and the author did a marvelous job of covering all of that.
Yeah, I want to find out when in her writing career was as a kid or as an adult that she found this story and found that, I got to write about this. When did a light bulb go off in her head? It's like, I got to write about this.
And she had to be motivated, I believe, to pursue that and to finish it because the research would have been tremendous, that she had to do. But I was curious about how these two because the story takes place in Wilkes County, North Carolina, beginning in the 1840s and then on. And I was just curious, how did these two Siamese boys end up in North Carolina on a farm? Well, what happened was when they were in New York, and they had amassed quite a fortune at that point, mm-hmm. they met a doctor, Dr. Calloway, who examined them. And he got to talking to them and found out they liked to hunt and fish. And he said, hey, come on down to my property in North Carolina. You'll have a good time there. So they did, and they loved it. It reminded them of Siam.
Yeah.
So they bought land and built a plantation, and there they were. And then they needed wives.
And they needed wives because they wanted to.
And they were 29 years old when they ended up in North Carolina. So, but they were ready for family.
I'm interested to see how the author, how she came to treat because I envision them as first, they were slaves at one time too. They were a product of somebody. They were under somebody's thumb. And then they became slave owners. And I was always, when I was reading this, going, wow, that doesn't, how could you do one thing and then do the same? You know, it's one of the intriguing things about the book. It's just like, you know, that emotional tie that the author, she treated it very well. But I just always thought, it's like, wait a minute, you were slaves at one point and then you hired slaves, but that all comes out in the book. And again, we don't want to give too much away, but it's a great read.
And she did definitely handle that carefully.
Carefully, that's...
But they were typical plantation owners, slave owners. They
Right.
worked in the field with them, but the slaves lived a very minimal life in cabins, and they even went out of their way to buy children.
And also having extra affairs
Yes.
to produce the children.
Now, to tell you the truth, trying to envision this whole setup was difficult enough.
As I said,
For
yeah.
me to try to envision the two of them having affairs with, actually turned out with some of the help, that was beyond imagination. I mean, how do you do that, you know?
Imagination. that's all it's going to take from us is imagination.
Now, their names were Chang and Eng. And Eng had 3 children that we know of. His wife figured it out, and they ended up living on the plantation and became sort of siblings to her children.
Right. I mean, we've been talking pretty much about the twins here. The sisters who became the wives, that's another whole dynamic that enters into the story. And one wanted to, one didn't want to, but you know, you can't take away there's twins there. You have to go together. But you know, and you'll see the reason why one of them goes to, I said, okay, let's do it. So
Obviously, their father was not very happy about their choice. No. He could not understand it at all. It took him quite a while.
Neither was the community.
Oh.
The community was against it.
They even had a demonstration outside of their home, their original home where they lived with their parents after they became engaged. And the demonstration was against them.
Sure.
And that was pretty scary. The father did come around. The mother, on the other hand, really never did. She was a recluse, and she just lived in her room, didn't really.
Yeah, but at the end there, she gave away her reasons.
Yes, and that was another interesting part of the story.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of ins and outs.
Yeah, there's a character that's introduced, one of the aunts, what I thought was, which I want to ask the author whether this person really existed, or did she just put that character in there just as a mechanic to tell the story. But we'll find out.
And the story is narrated by Sally, one of the twins. The other sister, rather, her name was Addie. And Addie was the bolder one.
Right.
She was the bossy one, and she was the one who fell in love with Chang. That was a true attraction. And Sally, like you said, ended up kind of going along with it. But in the end, I believe there was a lot of love between Sally and Eng. And
Yes.
he was the quieter twin. So
the more thoughtful one. He had a little more deep thinking into his life, and say, okay, yeah, there's more to this relationship than what's on the surface. So yeah, This is your third book with this author.
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, my book group read 2 of her previous books.
Okay,
Yeah.
so now let's talk to the author, Christina Baker Klein. Christina Baker Klein, thank you for joining us.
Delighted to be here.
And thank you for writing The Foursome.
I am glad I wrote it too. Thank you.
In our little 55 plus community here, there's a lot of writers. And one of the first things I'd like to get into, just a couple of questions about your writing, if you don't mind, before we get into the actual book. When did you discover that you wanted to be a writer?
I always say that most people, everybody starts out creative. All children want to write, they want to draw, they want to paint, they want to sing and dance. And most people put that aside at some point. And I guess the truth is I never put it aside. I just always kept doing it.
Was there somebody in your family who was a writer?
My parents were both professors. Nobody wrote fiction. And the older I get, and as I've written books like The Foursome and some of my other recent books, I've realized that I'm more like my father, a historian, than I ever thought I was. I mean, I love making things up, but I actually love facts. And, this book, the Orphan Train book that I wrote, another book about women sent to Australia from the British Isles, in a labor program, they're all very much based on facts. And so that is the legacy, I think, that I grew up with that influenced me pretty profoundly.
So when you write, then do you do your research and outline everything, kind of put the story into your head and then just write it out?
Every book is different. Though I'm working on a novel now that I'm kind of researching and writing very much at the same time. In part because it's sort of a big American story. I won't go into what I'm working on now, but
Yes.
To go back to The Foursome, I would say, I really just had to learn so much about not only physically what it would have been like to be these conjoined brothers, but also, the time period. If you've read the book, you know that it's set in the 19th century in North Carolina, and I didn't quite realize when I got into the story how much of it would be about the Civil War and about the great upheaval that was happening in that moment.
Well,
and so I had to do a lot of research on the Civil War. And if you know anyone who studies the Civil War, you know that people are passionate about it and know a lot about it. So given that I was writing a novel that involved that research, I knew I needed to know everything I could, or I wouldn't be able to pull it off.
It's also, you have a family tree. You're related. These are distant cousins of yours, the daughters, or the sisters, rather.
I know. It's honestly the craziest story. These 2 women from rural North Carolina who grew up in farmland, very rural, married 2 of the most famous men in the world who were conjoined and who also were Asian. And at that time and place, all of those facts were pretty shocking. I mean, it would be shocking today, actually, but it was very shocking then, as you might guess.
When did you find out about this, your family history, as a kid?
Yeah, I've known about it for a really long time, but I just never thought I could wrap my head around writing that story. It was just a quirky, we all have family stories. It was just a story in my family. But as I got older and my cousin, who is my age, started going to those family reunions and really learning a lot about the story, I realized that there was so much there to explore that no one was doing that I wanted to do it. My last novel took place in the mid-19th century. I kind of fell backwards into writing novels set in the past and I wasn't sure I could do it. I wasn't, how do you get the diction right? How do you get all the details right? But I had just spent a couple years doing that. And so I realized I had the tools, and now is the perfect time to tackle it.
Well, the foursome was certainly a big undertaking for you, Christina. How did you stay motivated? Because it took you quite a while, didn't it, to research it and write it?
It did, but really the time, I put it aside for 3 years when I was in the middle of writing it, because all of the subjects in the book, a lot of the subjects are quite fraught. I was writing about slavery. I was writing about the Civil War. I was writing about race and disability. And I wanted to be sure that I really knew what I was doing. I was afraid that, there have been a lot of books that have been canceled as a result of people, sort of fixating on who gets to tell the story, which is a totally important and valid conversation to have. But it was part of what created a delay for me in writing the book. I actually put it aside. I worked on another book. But then two things happened that brought me back to it. Number one, I wrote the book, The Exiles, and I started getting letters from writers who were saying that I had given them, by writing that book, the confidence to write about cultures that aren't your own. One of my 3 subjects in that novel is an Aboriginal girl who really lived. And then my cousin came back from a reunion and said, if you don't tell this story, who's going to? So, I really felt like she was right, and that it is my story to tell. And the truth is, I haven't had any problem having written it now, at least knock on wood so far. It's been out for a few months. And, people, not even quite a few months, like, 6 weeks or something. But people seem to be responding to it the way I had hoped.
Congratulations on that. I'm so glad. We've recommended it to people ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you.
I do have one question for you about the story. You chose Sally as the narrator, and I was just wondering why you chose Sally, and the second part of that question is, if you had chosen Addie, how would the story have differed, do you think?
When I started the novel, I was writing from both of their perspectives, the 2 sisters, but Adelaide was never questioned her desire to enter this interesting arrangement, to marry Chang, who was the more dynamic of the brothers. She was this beautiful, charismatic woman, by all accounts, and she was just very sure of what she wanted. Sally was not. She was plain, she was shy, and she was sort of coerced into marriage to the awkward, shyer brother. And that just created an interesting story that I knew would be a lot more fun and profound, I think, to follow, because I believe the reader, when you enter this book, you have a little bit of trepidation about what it's going to be, and
right,
what's going to happen and why these people get into this situation. And I think you might even think, am I sure I want to read these details? I don't even know if I want to wrap my head around this. And I think Sally is a good narrator to lead you into the story because she feels that way herself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a little disconcerting as a reader to try to envision a lot of the situations.
Dynamics.
The dynamics.
Physically and mentally.
Physical dynamics, yeah.
Yeah,
but
every in-law relationship is complicated. Imagine being with your husband and you can't even ever talk about his brother because his brother is never not present. All of those, even the simplest dynamics became more complicated. You couldn't vent about your sister because her husband was always present. It's hard to even imagine. Mm-hmm. But as I wrote the book, what my goal, and I hope you felt that this happened, is that my goal was that the reader would come away at the end really understanding how that did work and how someone could end up in that situation. And so that was, at one point my character says, even the most extraordinary life feels ordinary when you're living it. And that was always my goal, was to have the reader sort of come away feeling that.
As both the marriages progressed and there became 21 children, at one point you separated the two families. One of the questions I had when I was reading is why did you put one of the families so far away in the beginning? They were like 40 miles away. Was that just a technique of the story?
No, it was the facts. It was what really happened.
Okay. One of the characters I thought that really added depth to the story was Aunt Joan. Was Aunt Joan fictional, or was that a fact as well?
Aunt Joan was really one of the only characters that I invented. I am Southern on both sides myself, and I find that in most Southern families, there's an Aunt Joan somewhere in the family tree. So
now, you started out writing modern fiction such as Sweetwater and Bird in Hand. Was there a point where you said, I just want to write historical fiction, or is it just something that you evolved into?
Yeah, no, it was actually a very specific thing. I didn't intend to write historical fiction, but we were visiting my husband's Midwestern family one Christmas, and my mother-in-law discovered a book that had been sent to her of newspaper articles from her hometown that she'd never really looked at. And it had an article that featured her father, an article about the orphan trains, and she had never even heard of the orphan trains. So when I got a hold of this story, I knew that it was really interesting and that people didn't know much about it at the time at all. This was about a decade ago, a little more than a decade ago. And so I wrote this novel, Orphan Train, that had 100 pages set in the past. The rest of it was set in the present day. But it was how I kind of got into writing books that are set in the past. And since then, I've just discovered that there are these really interesting stories that are kind of hidden in plain sight. So it's become an interesting, fertile ground for me to write about, but I didn't do it consciously intending to work on a different genre. It just kind of evolved over time.
The thing about the plantation that I thought was interesting, the way you described it and the way we saw it, it all seemed very normal, everyday life. It didn't really, you didn't really point out the problems of slavery while it was a working plantation. People just went along with their jobs, and it was pretty much just the way it was. And then there was a disruption to that, which I found interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to show what life was like then and how normal it was to the people who lived it, even at the same time that it became clear as time went on how wrong it was. But I think laws change, and then people have to adapt to changing laws. If the Civil War had gone differently, we might very well live in a different America than the America we live in now. And I kept thinking that as I was writing this book, that it's a lifestyle that a lot of people did not want to give up. And there are still people alive today who I think would quite happily fit back into that kind of lifestyle. So those were kind of some of the questions that I was grappling as I wrote the book.
If Sally and Addie could walk into a room today after reading this novel, what is the one thing that you would hope they would tell that you got exactly right?
I think I hope that I got right what it was like for the two of them to make the choice to be with these men who were not uncomplicated. In addition to the fact that they were conjoined, they were brilliant, they were charming, but they were also tough. And one of them was an alcoholic, and the other one was very stubborn. So I would hope that they would come through reading the book and say that I got to the heart of what it felt like to live the way they lived. But also, I just think there are a lot of interesting life lessons to take away from the book, just about relationships in general. I mean, how do you, when in any kind of partnership, how do you keep yourself separate, and how much do you give up of who you are? And those are kind of universal questions that I wrestled with in the book, even though it was quite a specific subject. There were ways to explore just what relationships are like between people, and how you draw boundaries, and how you keep, your soul intact, I think.
Do you have a specific, because you're mentioning women, do you have a specific demographic that you write to? It's like, do you picture a person? Do you...
That's a good question. I don't have a specific demographic that I write to. I'm really writing for myself. I'm writing with a lot of curiosity about the subjects. I want to understand how these worlds happened, how people made the choices they made, and what it felt like to end up where they ended up. And I don't think much about pleasing a certain reader or writing to a certain reader. I'm really trying to write to myself. I think my writing, more than anything, I just pare back a lot. I'm always trying to make it spare. I want the story and the emotion to come through, but without too much overt sentiment. So I think that's always my goal when I'm writing.
When you're writing, I mean, it's talk about yet.
Yeah, I'm doing it with a new book, again, a book set in the past. But my criteria is pretty high for myself. Like, I want to set myself new goals and always have some challenges, things that I've never dealt with before, and just to try to stay close to the bone of the emotion of the story and the people who are in it. And so it's always really fun to enter a new project, and I'm in that fun moment at the moment.
Cool. Christina, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for all your hard work doing this and providing this for us to read. We appreciate it.
Well, I hope your group really enjoys it, and I'm so glad to have been invited to talk with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I hope you enjoyed meeting Christina Baker-Klein and hearing what we had to say about the book and the questions we had for her. So see you next time. Bye-bye.